And the truth coming to light, man. G. Bush exposing these clowns, Rex Ryan, all of these people, letting it be known Shedeur Sanders has a real shot at taking over the mantle in Cleveland, man. I hope he's able to get it done. We got to get into what G. Bush had to say, man, because he broke it down. Earl the Pearl broke it down. We got to get into it, man. Welcome to Keep the Vision. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, share the channel, hit the bell notification, hype the video. That would be greatly appreciated. Let's get right into things. This was actually reposted by Coach Prime.
He was called selfish. Then a grown man tried to call him a kid. And that's when Cleveland lost its mind. Because what happened next wasn't just a story about football. It was a story about respect. About a young man trying to build something real in a city that's been burned before. And about the people who couldn't stand to watch him do it his own way. This is the story of Shedeur Sanders and why Browns fans finally had enough. Let's start with the pressure, because that's where every story about this kid actually begins. He didn't walk into Cleveland with a clean slate. He walked in with a last name that came preloaded with expectations, a father who built a Hall of Fame career on swagger and confidence, and a fan base that's been starving for a real answer at quarterback for longer than most of them care to admit. That's not an easy seat to sit in. That's a seat where every throw gets dissected, every interview gets clipped, every off-season photo becomes a headline. And from day one, people were watching for a reason to say he wasn't built for it. That's the thing about pressure in this league. It doesn't wait for you to prove yourself first. It shows up before you've thrown a single pass in a real NFL game. It shows up in comment sections, in radio takes, in national panels where grown men who've never met the kid start making assumptions about his character based on a highline reel and a headline. And Shedeur knew that walking in. He's talked about it. He said in his own way that he expected the noise. What he probably didn't expect was how loud it would get, and how fast people would be willing to twist something good into something ugly. Because here's what actually happened. While everyone was busy debating whether he had the right mentality to lead an NFL locker room, he was out in the community, quietly doing what a lot of guys with his platform never bothered to do. He hosted a free football camp. Hundreds of kids showed up. Kids from neighborhoods where travel teams and private coaching aren't even on the table financially, where just getting equipment is a stretch for a lot of families. He didn't charge them a dime. He didn't need cameras there to make it happen. He just did it. Anyone who spends time around underserved communities knows what that actually means. It's not just a football camp. It's a kid getting to feel like somebody with a platform sees him. It's a kid getting to catch a pass from an NFL quarterback and walk away thinking maybe his own dream isn't so far away after all. That's not a small thing. That's the kind of moment that sticks.
Sanders, you had Rex Ryan trying to make it seem like Shedeur Sanders is being selfish and he's all about himself and all of this stuff. Let's see what G. Bush had to say about that.
He just gave a camp, right? He spent a bunch of money to go down there. And let me just tell you about what happens in the black community. Like when these people, we talked about how expensive it is to do things. We talk about how travel this. We talk about how there's no access. He pulled up to a place where there's disenfranchised people who don't have much. And just to see the joy on their faces in the way.
And that should have been the story. A young quarterback giving back before he'd even locked down a starting job. But instead, the story that started circulating was that he was selfish, that he was more focused on himself than on the team. That take came from a former NFL head coach, a guy well known for strong opinions and even stronger reactions. And it landed like a gut punch to a fan base that had just watched this kid pour his time and his own money into their city. The criticism didn't stop at the camp. It reached into his personal life too. He'd done a photo shoot in the offseason, on his own time, and that somehow became evidence in the case against him. As if a professional athlete taking care of his brand, on his own dime, during time that belonged to him, was some kind of red flag. As if every guy in that league doesn't do the same thing without a second thought from anybody. That's when people started asking the real question. Was this actually about football? Or was this about something else entirely? Because if you strip away the noise and just look at what he was doing on the ground, in Cleveland, with real people, in real neighborhoods, the picture doesn't match the criticism. It doesn't match at all. He showed up for families affected by wildfire damage in the area. He's been tied to random acts of generosity that never got the same headline treatment as the manufactured controversies. Chains gifted to people who needed a moment of joy. Time spent with families who lost everything and needed somebody to remind them they weren't forgotten. None of that fits the narrative that was being pushed. And that's exactly why so many people pushed back. One of the loudest and most personal reactions came from inside the football world itself, from voices who've actually watched this story unfold up close. The response wasn't just defensive. It was almost personal, like watching somebody they respected get unfairly labeled struck a nerve. The message was simple: stop telling half the story. If you're going to talk about who this young man is, talk about all of it, not just the parts that fit a narrative that gets clicks. And that's really the heart of this whole thing, isn't it? The gap between what actually happens and what gets amplified. Because negativity travels faster than generosity. A bad headline outruns a good deed every single time. And Shedeur Sanders has been living in that gap since the moment he stepped into this league. Now here's where things start to shift, because this isn't just a story about outside noise anymore. This is where somebody from inside the building, somebody who understands what it actually takes to make it in Cleveland, stepped up and said something that changed the entire conversation. Tyvis Powell, a name Browns fans know well, a guy who's lived the grind of professional football and understands exactly what it means to fight for a roster spot in a city that doesn't hand anything out for free, went public with his read on the situation. And what he said mattered, because it wasn't coming from a national commentator chasing a hot take. It was coming from somebody who's actually been in those meeting rooms, who understands the culture the Browns are trying to build.
They reacted was crazy. If you're a person, I got love for any kids, right? I love kids to make sure that they have access to certain things. So for Rex Ryan to take that opportunity when somebody is doing something good in their community to do something where he's going to garner some respect or garner some clicks, bro, it wasn't even about that. He just gave a free camp. And at certain points in time, you got to look at yourself in the mirror as a grown man. Like, what makes you say that? When you saying that, oh, it's a me guy when he's out.
Powell's take wasn't about hype. It was about fit. He pointed to the things that actually matter long-term in a locker room: discipline, preparation, the ability to handle criticism without letting it break your focus. And according to people close to the situation, Shedeur has shown exactly that kind of composure behind the scenes, even while the outside world was trying to paint him as something he's not. That's the piece that gets lost in all the outside noise. The kid isn't out here clapping back at every critic. He's not feeding the fire. By most accounts, he's the opposite. He's someone who's actively trying to tune out the noise and stay locked in on his own growth, on his own peace of mind. That's a mature approach for a guy his age, especially with the kind of attention he's dealing with on a daily basis. And that composure is exactly why people who understand the game, people like Powell, believe he fits what Cleveland is building. Not because of the name on the back of his jersey, not because of hype, but because of how he carries himself when the pressure is at its highest. Let's talk about generational gap for a second, because that's really at the core of a lot of this criticism. There's an entire generation of former players and coaches who came up in an era where quarterbacks were expected to fit one mold, speak a certain way, carry yourself a certain way, keep your personal life completely separate from your public image. And when a new generation comes in with a different approach, when they express themselves differently, when they build their brand differently, it gets read as arrogance instead of what it actually is, which is just a different generation navigating the same pressure in a way that makes sense to them. That doesn't mean older voices in the game don't have value. A lot of that old school mentality built the foundation this league stands on. But it does mean that not every difference in approach is a character flaw. Sometimes it's just change, and change is uncomfortable for people who built their careers under different rules. So when a young quarterback dances before a game instead of silence, when he does a photo shoot on his own time, when he speaks with confidence instead of forced humility, some of the older voices in the game see that as a problem. But when you actually look at the results, when you look at what he's building in the community, when you look at how he handles himself under criticism, it tells a completely different story than the one being pushed by his loudest critics. Think about that for a second. A rookie, still trying to earn trust in a new city, still trying to prove himself on the field, taking time out of a packed off-season schedule to sit with people who just watched their homes disappear. Nobody made him do that. There was no marketing team pushing that appearance, no sponsor attached. Just a young man showing up because he understood, on some level, what it means to lose something and need somebody to remind you that you're not alone in it.
Now, that would be a great thing, Earl, but we obviously got this a little bit later on, and this is something in reaction that you said to Rex Ryan. The quote is, "Get a load of this kid. Great talent, needs to realize it's a franchise quarterback. There has to be more we than me." Come on, man. Earl goes on to say he has to realize it's more than we than me is crazy when this man just hosted a free football camp for kids. Also a rookie. He showed up and hosted an event.
That's the kind of detail that doesn't trend the way controversy does. A camp for kids doesn't get the same engagement as a hot take from a former head coach. A quiet visit to a family who lost everything doesn't outperform a manufactured beef on social media. That's just how the algorithm works, and it's exactly why so many people only ever saw one side of this story, the loud side, the negative side, the side built for clicks instead of truth. but the people who actually live in Cleveland, the people whose kids ran drills at that free camp, the families who got a visit when they needed one. They saw something different. And slowly, that version of the story started spreading too, one conversation at a time, one comment section at a time, until it caught up to the noise and started drowning it out. Now let's get to the football, because at the end of the day, that's what actually determines how this story ends. The tape doesn't lie. It never has. Every rep in practice, every opportunity given, every read on film, that's the actual evidence that matters here, not off-season headlines and not manufactured controversy. And that's the standard a lot of people close to this situation are asking everyone to hold him to. Judge him by what happens on the field. Judge him by his preparation, by his reads, by his growth from one week to the next. That's a fair ask. That's the ask every young quarterback deserves, especially one carrying this much weight into a city this hungry for stability at the position. And it's worth remembering what that hunger actually looks like in Cleveland. This isn't a fan base that's been spoiled with stability at quarterback. This is a fan base that's watched name after name come through, watched hope rise and fall more times than most cities can stomach. So when a new quarterback walks in, especially one with this much attention already attached to his name, the scrutiny isn't just about him. It's about years of accumulated disappointment looking for somewhere to land. That context matters, because it means every throw gets magnified, every practice report gets analyzed like it's a playoff box score. Every small mistake in camp becomes a referendum on whether this is finally going to be different or whether it's just another chapter in the same frustrating story. That's an enormous amount of weight to carry into your first real offseason in the league, and it's weight that has nothing to do with anything he's actually done wrong. But here's what people close to the building keep coming back to when they talk about him. It's not just his arm talent, even though that's real. It's not just his ability to process a defense quickly, even though teammates have pointed to that too. It's his response to failure. It's how he handles a bad rep in practice, how he handles getting corrected by a coach in front of the group, how he comes back the very next play instead of letting one mistake spiral into 3. That's the kind of trait that doesn't show up in a highlight reel, but it's exactly the kind of trait that determines whether a young quarterback survives the grind of an NFL season or gets swallowed by it.
And some people kind of like push back and was like, you giving him a pass. This ain't about generational. Some people that's older than us don't understand how the youth move and why they move the way that they do. And this was in response to him basically doing a photo shoot on his own time with his own money during our off season. And he had a problem with that. And it's like, well, damn, he can't do nothing that he enjoyed that makes his life, feel good. Everybody's allowed to.
And that resilience has been tested constantly, not just by opposing defenses, but by the constant hum of outside noise trying to define him before he's even had the chance to define himself. Every young player in this league deals with criticism. That's part of the job. But very few deal with the specific kind of scrutiny that follows a name like his, where every choice gets read through a lens that has nothing to do with football and everything to do with narrative. Despite all of it, the reports from inside the building have stayed consistent, early to the facility, detail-oriented in the film room, respectful with staff, the kind of habits that don't make headlines but make careers. And that consistency is exactly why voices like Powell's carry weight when they talk about him fitting into what the Browns are trying to build for the long haul, not just for one flashy season, but for a foundation that can actually hold up over time. And here's where the emotional turning point of this story really lives. It's not in a single game. It's not in a single stat line. It's in the moment fans started to realize that everything they'd been told to be suspicious of didn't hold up under scrutiny. The selfish label didn't hold up against hundreds of kids running free camp drills on a summer afternoon. The immature label didn't hold up against a young man who showed up for wildfire victims without asking for credit. The distracted label didn't hold up against a locker room presence people inside the building describe as focused and coachable. Piece by piece, the criticism started collapsing under its own weight. And that's exactly why the reaction from Browns fans hit as hard as it did. Because it wasn't just anger at one former coach making one bad take. It was months of frustration finally boiling over. Frustration at watching a young man do genuinely good things in their community, only to watch those stories get buried under manufactured drama that had nothing to do with who he actually is. If you're new here and you want more stories like this one, real ones, the ones that dig past the headlines and get into what's actually happening with these players as people, go ahead and hit subscribe. This community is only getting bigger, and there's a lot more of this story still to tell. So where does this actually go from here? What happens next for Shedeur Sanders in Cleveland? The expectations haven't gotten smaller. If anything, they've gotten heavier, because now it's not just about proving the doubters wrong on the field. It's about proving that the character being questioned all offseason was never actually the problem in the first place. It's about showing, rep by rep, game by game, that the foundation being built off the field, the discipline, the composure, the genuine care for the community around him, translates into consistency when the lights are the brightest. That's not an easy standard to live up to, but if the people who've actually spent time around him are right, if the version of Shedeur Sanders described by teammates and insiders is the real one, then this is a young man who's already shown he can handle pressure most people his age would crumble under. He's already shown he can absorb unfair criticism without letting it change who he is. He's already shown that his priorities go beyond his own stat line, beyond his own headlines, and into the lives of people who needed somebody to show up for them. Maybe that's the real story here. Not whether he wins the starting job, not whether he silences every critic, but whether a city that's been let down before is finally willing to give a young man the benefit of the doubt he's actually earned.
Because somewhere in Cleveland right now, there are kids who got to run routes with an NFL quarterback for free. There are families who lost everything to fire and had somebody show up when it mattered. There's a locker room watching a young player handle unfair criticism with more grace than a lot of grown men could manage. And there's a fan base that's finally starting to see the difference between the story being sold to them and the one actually unfolding right in front of them. Because at some point, the truth always catches up. It might take a season, it might take longer than that, but eventually the tape talks, the community remembers who showed up for them, and the locker room tells you who actually earned the trust of the men standing next to him. Headlines fade, hot takes get forgotten by the next news cycle. What stays is the kid who kept his head down, kept giving, and kept showing up game after game, visit after visit, no matter how loud the noise around him got. That's the story worth telling, not the noise, not the headlines. The kid who kept showing up, even when nobody was giving him credit for it. And if Cleveland is patient enough to let this story play out the right way, they might just find out that what they've been waiting for was already standing right in front of them the entire time.